Wow, childhood was great. I'm excited for a bright future.
9/11.
What?
Yeah, it's 9/11. It's going to be the worst terrorist attack in human history, and the world's never going to be the same.
All right, well, I'm sure by the time I get to college, things will...
Financial crisis. There's going to be one of the worst financial crises ever.
All right, well, whatever. I'm sure by the time I'm 30...
Global pandemic. There's going to be a global pandemic that irreparably shifts how society operates. Forever.
This is becoming too much for me. All right, well, I was always shown that the key to happiness is just raising a family and owning a home. So I'm just going to focus on that because I'm finally making $100,000 a year.
$250,000.
Huh?
Yeah, you're going to need $250,000 a year for all those things now.
Are you kidding me? Gee, I mean, I guess I'll just go back to medical school then.
$300,000, that's going to cost $300,000 and also 10 years of your life.
Oh my... Whatever, I'll just pursue my passions and become an artist.
They're going to try to replace you with AI.
Good God. I can't deal with this anymore. I'm just going to revert back to my childhood and watch some of my favorite shows. Try to forget about this.
Child abuse.
What?
Yeah, child abuse. They were all abusing children.
Ugh. I need to go back to church.
Also abusing children.
I can't do this anymore. Is the government at least like trying to fix this? Abusing children?
Abusing children, yeah.
I think I speak for all millennials when I say, like, we are the customer service generation, you know? Not because we all work in customer service, but because we live like we do. You know, we were raised to put everybody else first. The customer's always right. And somewhere along the lines that became like our entire personality. You know, we say things like, no worries, when there are definitely worries. We put LOLs and ha-has at the end of every text so that we don't come across too aggressive. You know, we grew up watching our parents send food back at a restaurant when it came out wrong, which is a totally normal thing to do. But if my food comes out slightly wrong, most likely I'm just going to eat it. And then I'll probably tip 25% because I feel bad I even had the thought of sending it back and how awkward that would have been for the server. It's ridiculous. It's objectively ridiculous. But you know what? We didn't become this way for no reason. Like, we grew up in a time of recessions and layoffs and team culture emails. And we just discovered that being pleasant is probably the easiest way to survive. You know, so yeah, we're the customer service generation. Overly polite, eager, a little too anxious, and just terrified of being that person.
The single most undeniable example of millennial slander are the participation trophies, because participation trophies were 100% the result of boomer insecurity. Boomers ordered these trophies. They demanded that they be given out to their kids when they lost at sports because they were insecure about the fact that their kid wasn't good at sports. This was a boomer phenomenon. We were just trying to play soccer. We were 7. We didn't care if we went home with a trophy. We weren't crying when we didn't win. Our parents were. They were the ones who insisted that everybody did a good job because they couldn't handle the fact that their kid didn't score any goals. And then 20 years later, they all seem to have been mind wiped and forgotten their little insecure moment at the soccer field and decided that we, as 7-year-olds, demanded to have trophies. Not how it happened. This is but one example of millennial slander, of which there are many, many examples. But this is possibly the clearest example of another generation having a little embarrassing moment and pinning it on us because we were involved.
If you were born before the year 2000, do you remember how we used to write 5-paragraph essays by hand? Not only that, you would write a rough draft and then a final draft. And you'd have to cite your sources MLA format, like cite the book. If you were smart, you'd be using EasyBib. And the structure to those 5 paragraphs always had like a who, what, when, where thing that you had to answer. Not only that, you would have to edit the draft and then create a final that also required edits. So it's like 4 different types of 5-paragraph handwritten essays. This is our generation's version of I had to walk 5 miles up a hill and take a bus to get to school. No ChatGPT. Not even close. We couldn't even use Word. Old school. Might as well have been a feathered quill with some ink.
I just love how everybody is like, oh, why are millennials so unbothered by everything going on in the world right now? And I'm like, honey, do you know what we've been through? Do you know what we've seen? We literally like cannot get triggered anymore. It's like when other people get triggered, they go from like here to here. Your trigger is our baseline. It's like when your cortisol levels jump, our cortisol levels have been up here since like 1999, right? So like you just can't bother us. So when we say like I can't even, you kind of get what it means now, right? It's like we've prepared for this mentally in our heads 10,000 times over before it even happens. So when everybody else is out here screaming and running around like, oh my gosh, what's going on with the world? We're just over here sitting with our bucket of popcorn waiting for this to crumble so we can finally step in and rebuild and do things a new way. And don't get me wrong, it's not like we don't have empathy. We kind of know what it feels like to have bad things happen to you. But on the other hand, I think we're all out here like, okay, can I quit my job yet and cash out my 401k and maybe just go enjoy life for a couple of days before this all happens? You know? And you ain't got to get ready if you stay ready. You know what I mean? That's our real superpower.
Millennials do not have a midlife crisis. Come here. It was already said so beautifully. Millennials cannot have a midlife crisis because every single day is a brand new crisis, right? We are living in a time right now where millennials have not had a break from historical events happening in current times. Millennials have lived through 2 recessions right now, right? Ask a millennial when's the last time they were able to sit down and relax and not stress about anything. I promise you they'll have to think about it. A midlife crisis insinuates you have enough money to buy and do things that you wish you would have done when you were younger. Millennials have the same financial status as Gen Z right now, which is paycheck to paycheck and just buying things hoping that the card goes through.
I love how collectively as millennials, we were like, adulthood sucks and I'm going back to what I know. And we all are doing it and I'm loving to see it. Like, yes, I am going to take care of these bills. I'm going to take care of the household, make sure my kids are good and do all the adult things. But I'm also going to wear Nickelodeon clothes. I'm also going to have a Powerline hoodie. I'm also going to binge watch Rugrats. I am also going to quote anything from Friday to Do Where's My Car. This is what I'm going to do. I'm also going to listen to early 2000s rock and roll and like Korn and Papa Roach and all them other, and I'm also taking back to like some Ja Rule, 50 Cent and some Busta Rhymes. Like, yes, this is what I'm going to do. I understand why the old folks were still playing 8-tracks well after CDs then came out. Like, nah, this was my decade. This is what I love. Well, I know we all had that point in time where we tried to be all mature and all that other stuff. Like, no. Okay, we'll still be mature to a certain level of emotional growth, but we are going to continue to love the things we love. We're still going to continue to watch WWF clips on YouTube of when Stone Cold come down here stunning and hitting everybody with chairs. We gonna still do this, all right? Like, this adult thing sucks, and we not about to get caught up in it. We're gonna have bad backs, bad knees, bad hips, still trying to drop it low for the 99 and the 2000s. And I love that for us.
Okay, let's talk about millennials because they get more flack than almost any other generation, and it's completely undeserved. Not because they're perfect, but because most people don't understand the position millennials were born into. Millennials aren't the problem. They are the acceleration generation, and acceleration always looks chaotic from the outside. Every generation inherits the unresolved patterns of the generations before them. The silent generation created the template of emotional suppression and obedience. Boomers hardened it with stability, endurance, and institutional trust. Gen X started to crack the shell, but they didn't break it. They're the bridge. They saw the walls closing in, but they didn't have the numbers or the cultural authority to dismantle anything. Millennials are the first generation who had to live fully inside the collapse of the old structures while simultaneously being responsible for building the new ones. This is an almost impossible assignment. They were raised to follow the rules of a world that was already dying. Go to college, work hard, buy a house, trust the system. By the time they reached adulthood, every single one of those structures had already failed them, not metaphorically, literally. So millennials learned early that the maps were wrong, that the systems didn't keep their promises, that endurance wasn't going to save them, adaptation would. This is why millennials look inconsistent to older generations. It's not inconsistency, it's acceleration. They are updating themselves at the same speed the world is shifting. But there's something else that doesn't get named enough. Millennials carry grief, massive, quiet, unspoken grief. The grief of a promised future that never materialized. The grief of doing everything right and still falling through the cracks. The grief of being blamed for systemic failures they didn't create. The grief of inheriting institutions that were already collapsing. The grief of being the first generation who had to accept that stability was fiction. the grief of having to emotionally reparent themselves because no one taught them how to navigate a world this unstable. And they're not on the other side of that grief. They are in the thick of it right now. Most millennials are between about 29, 30 to 44. This is supposed to be the settled stage of life, the building years, the stability years, the payoff years. Instead, this is a decade where they're discovering in real time that almost nothing they were promised has transpired in the way it was supposed to. They were handed the old script in one ear, told to follow it, and then shoved into a reality that operates by completely different rules. And while they're processing that collapse, many of them are also raising families or starting families with no real cultural blueprint for how to parent through instability. Millennials are metabolizing more structural change than any generation before them, and somehow they're still absorbing the majority of the criticism. It's simply not fair. And here's the irony. Despite all of this, millennials built things. They built entire industries. They normalized therapy and emotional literacy. They challenged harmful traditions. They broke generational silence around mental health, trauma, identity, work culture, and systemic corruption. They forced institutions to confront their own failures. Millennials didn't break anything. They were simply the first generation whose awareness outpaced the systems they inherited, and that's why they were punished for it. When a field destabilizes, the generation who feels it first gets treated like the problem when they're actually the early warning system. Acceleration doesn't look graceful. It looks like questioning, pivoting, experimenting, and refusing to pretend. It looks like telling the truth even when the truth is uncomfortable. Millennials were never meant to be the golden children. They were the transition team, and transitions are messy because they expose everything that isn't working. If you look at millennials through that lens, they're not chaotic. They're coherent to the era they were born into. They're coherent to change. They're coherent to the truth that the old world was already collapsing. Millennials are not the problem. They're the ones who felt the collapse first and moved anyway.